Yeah, I just want to say thank you very much for this, for having a chat. So I'm a sort of freelance writer. I write a lot about sort of game history, and at the moment I'm doing a series of articles called Ancient Worlds, where I'm just sort of looking into that first generation of MMOs, particularly the ones that are still sort of kicking on amazingly. And so done a couple parts to it so far. One sort of looking at the broad sort of genre and how it stands out amongst the games industry, and then the second part was looking at the big title of that first generation, Ultima Online, that sort of a lot of people had heard of. And now I want to look at your game, Meridian 59, which is sort of, it's often noted as the first sort of MMO, really, of definitely the first of that era. So yeah,
I believe ours was the first game where we called it an MMO. I mean, it was actually on the box, I think.
Yeah, it's funny because I always see that Richard Garriott came up with the term, but then it's like, well, how's it on our box?
Maybe he added the RPG part. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. You gotta add another letter, and then you can claim something else.
Derivative.
How did you guys get started in the? I guess how'd you get started in gaming in general? Like, where'd you develop the interest and the passion? I saw that in your history that that you played a lot of games back in the early days of MUDs.
Yeah, actually, we didn't play MUD so much, but we started writing. Well, I'll tell you about Scepter of Goth, but we started writing games when we were very little. I was 10 and Chris was 8, so I would type and he would sit next to me, and we'd write games in BASIC. And first we'd just write them for our family and for ourselves, and then once BBSs came along, we started uploading our games to BBSs. And people started playing them, and then when they realized they were written by like 13 and 11-year-olds, they're kind of impressed. So that's kind of how we got started writing games. Yeah. And then how we got started, online games. I mean, there were online games in BBSs, but it was a different mechanism because you could only play one person at a time. But there was this game called Scepter of Goth, which was text-based, and it was dial-up. It was run on a single IBM PC XT with a special hardware to have 16 modems connected to it at once. And you would dial in at 300 baud. And for people who don't know what baud is, you can read faster than 300 baud. So you would wait for the characters to appear on the screen. And it was a text-based mod, essentially. You'd walk around rooms, and it was kind of a medieval fantasy setting. And I think I picked it up from some kids at junior high school or something. So there was someone running a site in our area, so that's how we kind of got hooked into it. And yeah, I don't know. I played that game a lot. I think Chris, you played it too, maybe a little later.
Yeah, I had some, but not quite as much. I mean, it was expensive. You had to pay by the hour to play.
That's right. Yeah, I think it was, $3 an hour or something, which for a 15-year-old or something is an extraordinary amount of money. So so we kind of had that game in our minds. That was when we were younger. Then we went off to college, and there were online games just coming on in college, like I don't know, it was like X Tank and like the X Window games that you'd play on a LAN. Yeah. So we kind of had this idea that it would be cool to write a game that was like Scepter, but there's this internet thing, which was very early. Like you legally could not use it for commercial purposes at the time, and that law changed in 1993 or 1994, I think. So it then became possible for people to write games that you could charge for on the internet. We weren't really looking to make money; we were looking to make games. But there were kind of a few things that came together at the right time. We were really interested in the games. We were at colleges where there was the internet, because a lot of colleges didn't have the internet at that time, and we knew enough. We didn't know too much, but we knew enough. I think if we knew too much, we would have known how hard it was. We wouldn't have bothered. So we kind of right in that sweet spot where we knew enough to do it, but not so much to know how hard it was.
Yeah. So you spent some time at Microsoft, I think you said. Did you sort of develop a lot of skills that you were able to apply to game development there, or was it sort of a whole different environment?
Yeah, Chris can tell the Microsoft story. It's pretty funny.
Oh, sure. Well, I don't know. Was it that funny? I mean, I
Well, it's funny that
remember.
we both wound up there at the same summer without talking to each other.
Well, that's true. Yeah. So, I mean, I would basically say no, that's not when we developed any game development skills. We'd written a lot of games and written a lot of software, which is why we were able to get internships at Microsoft. It was after my freshman year of college, and this was 1993, and I guess I had assumed that Microsoft was the best software development company in the world. They were very successful at that point, and I'd written some assembly language programs, shareware programs, one of which was relatively successful, and so I was able to get an internship in the DOS group, which was kind of cool. And then Andrew was looking for a summer job, and then ended up working on something with Windows NT, right?
Yeah, it was some mainframe thing. Actually, it was really strange.
Oh yeah, it's like
SNA server. Yeah,
that's
that's
right.
not even
Yeah.
around anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, I ended up making the cab file format while I was there, which was kind of cool because when you make a new file format and you're at Microsoft, you can put your initials to be the header of either the file or each block within the file or whatever. So CK was all over millions and millions of floppy disks and CDs with distributions of Microsoft Office for the next like 20 years. I remember seeing some reverse engineering of the cab file format, and someone posted block header CK, and it said Calvin Klein ? This was years later, so I just kind of laughed. But yeah, that was just officially sanctioned. And just like exe files start with the letters MZ, that's the initials of the guy in 1981 or whatever who made the exe file format.
The other thing that was strange was we had this idea that we were going to maybe do a game, and I mean, we had no money, right? Microsoft interns, so I guess we had we had an intern.
You did all right, but yeah, you don't make a lot of money as an intern anyway.
Yeah, and so this was 1993, like Chris said. So everyone was running Windows 3.1. Windows 95 had not come out yet, but Windows NT was just coming out of beta, and writing software for Windows 3.1 is an absolute nightmare. And for NT,
which you did, if you recall.
Yeah, I still have the mental scars. I definitely remember that. But I was working in the group that's doing stuff for Windows NT, so I was like, this is so much better. This is much more like writing for Unix, which I had done at school. And so because we were interns, we were able to pick up discount copies of software. And we got 2 copies of Windows NT for $5 each, and we got 2 copies of the compiler. And I mean, those 2 together would have been $1,000, which we did not have. So it was actually it was a strange coincidence that we were able to basically just unload back up the truck to the company store to get all the stuff we needed to start writing Meridian.
Very handy.
Yeah. Well, because our goal was to write a game that for PCs that people could play, and at the time, pretty much all games for PCs were for DOS. And even if you had Windows on your computer, you would run DOS games in it. But at the time, I mean, 1993, I don't believe there was any TCP/IP stack for DOS. And then a year or two later, when there were TCP/IP stacks for PCs, they were Windows only at that point. But we knew we could each afford. We wanted to write this client server game, and we knew we could each afford to have one computer. So we had to figure out what one operating system could run the client and the server, and yet also the client would be runnable by real people out there. So it ruled out using Linux, which we knew about and it existed, although it was very early, because there's no games for Linux, not commercial games or widely used games. And so yeah, we got those copies of Windows NT 3.1, which was the first version of Windows NT, because Microsoft talked about how Windows 95. I don't remember what it wasn't called. It was just called Chicago. I think that was a code name. It wasn't out yet, but they talked about how there was going to be the next version of Windows, which was going to be compatible with apps for Windows NT. So we thought that if we were lucky, the timing would work out that we could develop the game and the server for Windows NT, and we could each just have one computer, and each in different physical places in the world could run the client and the server on our one development machine each. And that largely worked out.
With I saw in the Meridian 59 history, you mentioned that you'd looked towards Looking Glass Studios and Papyrus at some point as well. What was the sort of, what prevented you from going down that path? And
yeah, I mean, so we were undergraduates. I mean, I didn't know anything. Like, I think neither of us had. I guess we were at Microsoft, but like we didn't spend a lot of time traveling the world or working real jobs or anything. Like, I think we were pretty naive. So, I was at MIT, and like Looking Glass was like kind of down the street because there was a lot of ex-MIT students. So I must have known someone from like the Ultimate Frisbee team who worked there or something. Like it was just random coincidence.
Yeah.
So, I like games, and I knew this guy who worked on games. Cool, I'll talk to those guys. So yeah, I went to I talked to Looking Glass and just kind of wandered around. Like I'd never interviewed for a job before. I didn't know what I was doing. But there were some people like, what were they working on? There was I saw some games that were in early development, like Ultima Underworld and System Shock, that eventually became big deals. But what did I know? So it's not like I had a plan of like, I'm going to go interview for game jobs, and if I see one of them, I just kind of like randomly went to some place. And we did have the idea though that we had worked at Microsoft. I was graduating from undergrad. Chris was, of course, still in school. And I'm like, boy, I guess for a lot of people, I mean, it's his privilege, but like a lot of people like work, life is kind of like working at Microsoft. And I don't think we super enjoyed our time there. Like I didn't want to do that for 30 years. And so I think we both kind of said like, we have this game thing that we maybe want to do. Let's try that. If it doesn't work, we can, I guess, go work for Microsoft for 30 years. So yeah, it was not much of a plan. So yeah, like I had randomly talked to some people in the game industry, but not to do any research or even really to consider a job, but just because they were there.
I mean, at the time, most of the games industry in the US was in Silicon Valley, and neither of us had ever been, well, I guess you had been to California to visit one college, but I'd never been to California even. Like, we had no idea what the industry was like.
We didn't really know that. I mean, obviously, if you think about it, like, of course, there's a games industry, like companies make games, but like that basic fact was not really forefront in our mind. I mean, like, if you would
play lots of games.
Yeah, if you had said electronic arts, I would have been like, I think I've heard of that.
Yeah.
Like, so we were very unaware of kind of how things worked. And that's what I'm talking about not knowing too much. If you knew that a game took $15 million and maybe at the time 20 people to make, who are we? Like two undergrads? No way. We would have bailed. So it was important kind of actually, I think, not to know too much about that.
And you spent a lot of time developing the game. It sounds like you did it sort of in between study breaks, in the basement sort of setup. It sounds like Meridian 59 had somewhat of a sporadic development cycle. Is that?
Yeah, it definitely did. So yes, what is it? It was the summer of '94. We both didn't get internships and said we're going to try to make this game full time. So we spent about 3 months in the summer of '94, and then during that next school year, we both sporadically worked on it. Worked on it a lot over winter break. But during the school year, less so. I mean, you were working on the 3D engine, I guess, particularly over Christmas break, I remember. And then that next summer, you worked on it full time, but I had a job like 8 hours a day. And towards the end of that summer is when it really started picking up, like, hey, this is actually pretty good because the 3D engine both existed and was hooked into the client server system, and nothing else out there like it existed. And originally the original goal was to make a game like Scepter of Goth, but with graphics, meaning it was going to be up to 16 players simultaneous, maybe dial up over, to a server that has a bunch of modems. And for development purposes, we had supported TCP/IP from the early days, but I mean, I think there's still a couple things in the code today, 27 years later or whatever, for serial port support. I mean, that was the original goal, but it was probably the summer of '95 there where we saw that internet-based games were viable and that this could be a good one.
Yeah, and I would say it was sporadic in terms of when we had to work on it because we were still in school. I went back for my master's and Chris was still an undergrad. Yeah. But when we were working on it, we did nothing else. I mean, we would get up at noon and we would work 16 hours and we would go to bed at 4 a.m. and then we repeat it 7 days a week. Like I've never worked so hard. I was working for nothing. I mean, we weren't getting paid. There was nothing. But so it was, there were times where we were in school and we were working hard at school. But when we were working on what became Meridian, there was nothing else happening. I mean, there was eat, sleep, program. That was it. And I think that with two people you can only go so far, but you can go pretty far.
Yeah, I mean, so by the end of that was summer '95. Then so then you were working at full time after right around whatever summer '95 and on. I had 1 year of college left, but I had just about all my credits already done. So I took the minimum number of classes and just worked all the time on Meridian. I mean, 7 days a week. I mean, like Andrew said, I mean, I remember the day I came home, and it was December 14th or 15th, '95, where I got home at, I don't know, it was about a 5-hour drive. So it was probably around 1 or 2 p.m. And then we were supposed to release it like right then, but then there's a whole bunch to the internet for the first alpha test. And there were problems, so we were up till like 2 or 3 a.m. Just after having gotten up early and driving home. And that was just sort of a regular day. It's like, you just work all day and things got a little bit better. You fix a bunch of problems.
Seems like there was a real sort of sprint towards MMOs in that, mid to late 90s. Were you aware of the other MMOs that were sort of on the way out, such as Ultima Online or The Realm or anything?
Not at that time. I don't know if had you heard of The Realm?
No, we hadn't heard of The Realm. We knew about some of the earlier generation, not the ones coming up. So we knew about like Legends of Kesmai, which I don't know.
The AOL games.
Yeah. So we knew about those, and we knew what we had was better than that. Yeah. We didn't know about Ultima Online, and certainly not The Realm until later. We did learn about Ultima Online later. I think again, like kind of being blissfully unaware. Like if you knew that Origin had 50 people working on a game and an unlimited budget, I think that would have been a problem if we had known.
Well, I think we scared them a bit too, though, because they announced when we went into beta, that was around March '96. I think we were trying to get some press about it, and then all of a sudden they announced their own beta test, like that was coming soon, months later, but it just swallowed up all the press.
Yeah, in fact, we talked to somebody at Origin, I think years later, and they told us like, oh yeah, we had this big team working on Ultima 9. I think that was the one that was coming out at the time. But then they saw the beta test of Meridian, and they moved a bunch of people from Ultima 9, which the single player series had always been the bread and butter. They moved a lot of people onto Ultima Online because they knew that like, the bar has been raised. They need to be a lot better.
Well, I remember when we launched that beta, I don't know if it was March or April, but just that time frame, the server did a reverse DNS lookup for the IP address of anyone who connected to it. So I wrote the server primarily, and Andrew wrote the client primarily. And so I was always running the server and looking at the server. And so the beta goes up, you see users connecting, and it did a reverse DNS lookup so you could see where people are from. This is back before, everyone's behind some random Comcast.net thing. So, I mean, of the first 50 users of the beta, probably like 30% of them were from Origin, and another 30% were from Variant, the makers of EverQuest. So it was
doing a bit of research.
Yeah, it was pretty darn clear that we'd gotten attention at that point from some.
I mean, that must have been pretty flattering, knowing that you guys had, I guess some of the bigger developers shaking a bit.
I mean, in retrospect, I'd say yes, but at the time it was more just panic and fear that no one was going to care about our game and that our art budget wasn't large enough. And how are we going to stay in business, and how are we going to make any money in this game when, we're this tiny company and don't have the resources, and clearly these other people are spending a lot more.
Yeah, I don't remember having a single second to think about that because we weren't sleeping. But there was the one really cool thing along those lines that I do remember is the very first day the alpha test went up, which was in 1995. that right?
That was that night I was talking about, December 15th.
Yeah. So we stayed up super late, and I couldn't, for whatever reason, I couldn't sleep. We put it, like we turned it on at like 3 in the morning our time and went to bed. And I got up at 8 or 9 or something, and there were a few people on, and there was this guy.
No, but before you even found that out, I remember you woke up and I woke up, and we said, I wonder if anyone's seen the game yet.
Yeah, that's right.
We were like, has anyone, because you posted on Usenet that it existed, and then it's like, we were wondering, did anyone try it?
Yeah, and so there was this guy on, and I was like, we were admins, so we could talk to the other players, and I was talking to this guy. He's like, "Oh, this is really cool," and like he had solved the whole game. I mean, the game was very small at the time, but like he had done the quest, the puzzle we put in, and he had found everything. I was like, "Oh, wow, that's pretty amazing." Like, do you play a lot of games? He's like, "I wrote Legends of Kesmai." And I was like, "Oh, that was really cool."
Oh, man.
So that, like, of all the things that came later, that was actually probably that was the thing that to me felt like the greatest validation of all the other things that came later. That was cool. That was one guy who was personally invested. And after we had spent 18 months killing ourselves, he solves the game in an hour, and it's like, yeah, it's really good.
So I guess when Meridian 59 did eventually hit the streets, so to speak, how much did it sort of diverge from what you'd originally envisioned? Did you have a really sort of final sort of fixed end vision for Meridian 59? Or was it quite organic development and sort of?
I think it's a hard question to answer. I think any big project, whatever, like great art is never finished. It's always abandoned. Like,
especially
of course, of course it didn't live up. Like, we wanted eventually, like, it would be really cool if like a whole bunch of servers were talking to each other. You could walk between them. There'd be multiple worlds. But I mean, that's a pipe dream. Like that's not what we imagined was going to be built in the first version. On the other hand, when it was published by 3DO, a legitimate game company with real money and people. And so I think when we were at a legitimate game company, we kind of thought that the bar would be comparable with other games published at that era. Like, it would have a serious budget and have a bunch of art. Like, it would look like, if maybe not a AAA title, at least like a double or single A title at the time. And just because of the way the company was set up and internal politics and everything, like Meridian didn't have the budget. The money went elsewhere. So I think we were disappointed in the kind of the polish. Like, it was really rushed out the door for corporate reasons.
Yeah.
So a few months more of polish and a little bit more investment into the art probably would have made a big difference, and it certainly would have made us feel better, because we felt like it was kind of like, we're more the technology guys. We built this thing, and then the game part of it was not done, and so that part was disappointing. I think fell a little short of where we wanted to be.
Yeah, well, I worked on the game part a lot with the scripters too. I mean, certainly the game didn't come out, and even today isn't what we originally dreamed of. I mean, like I said, we originally dreamed it was a dial-up game. The first summer it was 2D instead of 3D, right? It became known as the MMO with really great player versus player systems. That wasn't something we dreamed of either, but we did dream of a game kind of like Scepter of Goth with graphics, and we achieved that for sure. So it both is and isn't exactly what we hoped, but it certainly was on long lines. It was the direction we were going the whole time, and there was lots of veering this way and that way, but it was a pretty consistent effort towards that direction for years.
With something that you'd sort of invested so much of yourselves, like as you were saying, just those crazy hours that you were working on it, and then the eventual sort of relationship with 3DO and the experience of that corporate side of the industry, how did that sort of affect your perception of the games industry as a whole? Did it sort of leave a bit of a bitter taste, the way it was, I guess, you're sort of rushed out for corporate reasons?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the short term, you have to consider we were very young. Like, this is our first job. We didn't really know how to I think me in particular, maybe kind of didn't know how to work in corporate groups. We were always the whiz kids, and Yeah, I think different skills were maybe needed to, like, we probably needed to do a better in like sales job, and like we weren't very good at that. So I think in the short term, like, yeah, we didn't have a great time in the time after Meridian was published. But like in the long term, I mean, Chris is still in the games industry. I did other games elsewhere. It's not like, after this we decided never to work in games again.
Yeah.
So it was, I mean, it was definitely it was a learning and maturation experience. It was published. I mean, lots of games get to 90% done and are canceled.
Yeah.
So you can't regret it. I think it was pretty amazing that it got to the finish line. And it, in fact, is it's still around 25 years later. That's pretty remarkable success. So yeah, not everything was perfect, but certainly don't regret any part of it.
It's had a few sort of I guess life cycles. You had the 3DO era, and then you had the near-death era, and now back to you guys. It's been a pretty interesting game as far as
resilient
go, to have these. Yeah, very, very resilient. What was the point when you were in 3DO where you sort of said, right, you were able to, I guess, walk away from something you'd invested in so much in, and I imagine that must have been pretty difficult to do.
Yeah, I mean, we were there for about a year. I would say in a lot, I mean, 3DO was not the most successful of companies, particularly when it came to software. But just in general, we were this tiny company, like we've been talking about. We were working crazy hours. It was a huge passion project. And, coming into a large company where this is just people's jobs, there's going to be a lot of culture clash. I mean, there's been books written about startups and getting acquired by large companies and having it not work out, largely for the same reasons. So I think there was a lot of that. I mean, the first 2 or 3 months we were at 3DO in particular, we were still working 7 days a week, 10-ish hours a day, and no one else in the company was, and, we didn't care. But then when we were doing that on our game, and then other people wanted to come in and say how the game should be, that didn't feel very right to us either, because it's like, well, we're putting in 3 times the effort you're putting into this game. Why should we do it your way?
Yeah.
So yeah, it I would say it definitely left it made me nervous about working on games specifically, because you can work on it for 3 years and then, it can be over. And maybe, we were with Meridian, a lot of people have played it and are still playing it, but a lot of games you can work on it for 3 years and then the game gets canceled before it comes out. And so while I've spent almost my career around video games, almost none of it's been in actual game development. It's been in platforms and community tools and other things that, frankly, I learned a lot about from Meridian 59. I mean, the fact so with my startup today, Athenoscope, when I go pitch it to investors and I'm trying to say that I know something about game platforms and game communities, I talk about how Meridian 59 has, about 6 weeks of game content in it. And here we are 25 years later, and at any given time, there's still dozens of people playing it. So I don't think they're there for the content. I think they're there for the community. So I think that I certainly look back on it as something that was very formative for me in learning about building software to bring people together and how games can do it. But there's a lot of mechanics that are not game specific that we learned there.
Yeah, and that actually is why I eventually left the game industry. I did work on a game for 3 years, but it was canceled. And then after that, I said, you know what? I don't ever want to do that again.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and that's common, right? It's kind of it's not a great comment on the efficiency and planning of game companies, but it happens a lot.
Yeah.
That doesn't really happen in movies or other genre, or other media, right? I mean, you don't think of, you never hear about a movie with like a bunch of A-list actors or actresses and hey, we decided not to release it.
Yeah, they're smart because they cancel stuff in pre-production, whereas games go into production for a year or two and spend all the money and then cancel it.
Yeah.
How did the game coming back into, sorry, I just had a notification come up. How did the game coming back into your hands sort of come about? So it was in the hands of Near Death from 2000 until about 2000.
Yeah. So I guess
2001 and 2010, I think.
Yeah.
2010, yeah. So I guess kind of rewinding a little bit. So 3DO basically switched off the game in 2000, and I remember that day very vividly because I was working at LucasArts, so I was working on a game, and people kind of knew that I had worked on the game before, and I said, "Oh, they're turning off my game today," and it was really a sad moment. Everyone's crowded around my monitor, and hundreds of people are online, and they've been playing.
Did you play it?
I did play it, not at that time, but I actually was kind of an incognito character for about 6 months, and I joined a guild. I mean, never cheated or anything, but like because like Chris is saying, it's like knowing the mechanics of how the game works is not the experience. The experience was getting to know the other people. So actually being in a guild and kind of like being attacked by other people and stuff like that. I did play a little bit, but not at that time. At that time, I was just kind of watching. Yeah. And it was, it was a funeral basically.
Yeah.
And then
I remember that day too. I was working at Yahoo at the time, and I made sure to get set up so I could be online during the goodbye. Yeah, there were hundreds of people and they're all waving, and then you got this dialogue popping up saying, disconnected from server. And we thought the game was dead at that point. I mean, and it was for a few months.
Right. So then when 3DO went out of business and their assets were liquidated, so Rob Ellis, our lead level designer, and Brian Green, who was a programmer on the game after we had left, they basically were able to buy it out of bankruptcy essentially, and then so they ran it as a company. I mean, that was their income for a few years, maybe 5 or 6 years at least. But it eventually got to the point where the game was too old. It was not enough. Even them eating ramen 3 meals a day they couldn't subsist on the revenues from Meridian. So they very graciously basically decided, you guys should have it back. So we got it back in 2010. We had some stuff to clean up.
The server took like 15 minutes to start up at that point.
Yeah, we had a lot of insights into things that maybe people who came later didn't. So we were able to really clean a lot of things up. And then, of course, we decided to open source it because we were not, to us, this was ancient history. We did this game when we were kids, and now we're much older. So open sourcing it was a way for it to continue living without us having to,
And giving back to people. A lot of people got into games because of some other game that they played when they were younger, and to be able to look at the source code of an old game or be able to poke at it or add your own thing. I mean, it's pretty awesome. I mean, in the last few years, I've seen source code was posted by Eugene Jarvis of Defender and Robotron. And it's just amazing. It's really cool to give back and to see, how things really worked, something that mattered a lot to you when you were young, and see that, this is just someone else's passion that they worked on for years. So yeah, we plan to open source it for a while, and after a few years we did. And it definitely did spawn a new generation of people working on it and making their own rooms, making their own monsters, making code changes. And to small parts of the Meridian community, it was controversial. Like, shouldn't it just be the way it always was and not be changed anymore because that was the game? But in my opinion, if that's the case, then it would just be dead because no one is going to play the same old thing forever. And so by letting people build onto it, it's given it new life, and it's made it more active in the last 5 years than it was in the 5 years before.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I've talked to a lot of people who really love games, and there's a lot of times games you play as a kid or like at a certain period when you're a teenager, like those are the games that will always be the greatest games of all time, no matter what comes after. Like for us, Scepter of God, like I bet if I went back and played Scepter of God, it's probably terrible. But for me, that's like one of the greatest games of all time because of when I played it and the technology at the time. And so that's my hero game. I never got to know how it worked. I didn't know who made it. But for other people, now it's weird because for other people, Meridian was their hero game. And not only that, but their parents played it. And so when they come to us and say, like, this was my favorite game of all time, and my dad showed it to me, like, it feels really strange because, like, two kids wrote it in a basement when they had nothing better to do. So it's an interesting kind of reversal. And like the fact that we were able to open source it, and some of these people who now are running their own servers, this was the game of my youth. And now it's mine. Like now I made my own version of it. Like if I'd been able to do that with Scepter, I would have been in heaven. That would have been amazing. So that really worked out great.
What's the community for Meridian 59? I mean, it's got to be pretty resilient to sort of to still be going after all these years. Is Is there, have they got a certain vibe? Have you always found that your community is really engaging with you, or they're sort of, are they a bit standoffish? I know some online communities can be sort of a bit standoffish with sort of new players. What do you think?
Well, keep in mind this game was known for PvP.
Yeah.
So not necessarily the softest, cushiest landing for
The
new
trial by
users.
fire sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's also old, you know. It's before there were online forums. It's before there was Facebook.
Look, it's from before instant messaging.
Yeah. So the
I
way
mean,
that
it's ancient.
the only way that you met these people were in the game, and like Chris has said, like the primary mechanism of the game is conflict. So you don't have. I mean, there people built websites and said, here's how the game works, and here's how the different spells works and stuff like that. But the community is kind of unique because of, I think, the way it formed and because it was so old. So the people who kind of gravitated toward it, just like we were working on it 80 hours a week, they were playing it 80 hours a week.
Yeah.
And so when
This is one of the first games of this type that you didn't have to pay by the hour, right? Our business model, it was $10 a month as opposed to $3 an hour, like virtually all the other online games all the other, persistent world games at that point. So if you don't have to pay by the hour, but you could play infinite, people did.
Yeah.
Right. And when they got their own servers, they put just as much time into it. I mean, we had the original level editor was terrible. It was literally a
That's an overstatement.
Yeah, it was literally a Doom editor that I had modified to work with our file format. Like, I didn't want to spend, we didn't have time. We had two of us. We didn't have time to make a UI for a level editor. So I just hacked this Doom editor to death. I mean, it was terrible. It crashed all the time. It was the fact that any levels were built with it is really a miracle. But like, some guy built a new room editor. I mean, that's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours. Someone built, like, replaced the entire client with like a new 3D version, with like hotkeys, like all the new MMO stuff that that in the last 20 years has been invented in the genre, and they wanted to put in there.
Yeah.
So like, these people are pretty hardcore, and you kind of have to be for such an old game. So I would say, there are people who've been playing for 25 years. There are people who've now been developing on it for 10 or 15 years, which is way longer than we developed on it. So that's kind of strange. Like, these people are really, really into it. Now that it's on Steam, we do get new players. So for a long time we didn't, and it was really just people who've been playing forever. But Steam really kind of changed the game. And if you look at the reviews,
when did that launch on Steam? Sorry.
Yeah, when did we go out on Steam?
Like, last year. It's just 2018 or 2019.
Yeah,
it was not that
3
long.
years. Yeah. And so you look at the reviews, and they're kind of funny. It's like, who knew that my favorite game of 2019 was going to be released in 1996? And of course, it's not because of the graphics or the technology or anything, but it's because, like, wow, like, there's like, games have a heart. That's the fun, right? And like, you can't design dock the fun. It's there or it's not. And Meridian's fun is like the systems that are built to get people to work together, like the guilds and the combat and the PvP. And that still really hasn't been replicated, because that's kind of a hardcore mechanic. Like, if you tried to run World of Warcraft with 50 million people doing PvP, you'd start World War III. You can't, it doesn't scale, right? So it's just kind of the new people who have come along have kind of discovered, like, oh, there's a different way of doing online games that really modern games don't do, either because it doesn't scale or because it's very risky. Who's going to spend $100 million on a design idea that may or may not pan out? But it did work once, and it still works even with fewer people playing. So it has kind of discovered a little bit of a newer audience, not huge, but enough to keep it going.
Do you think that, because there's been a real, I guess, over the past 5 to 10 years, there's been a real revival, a real shift to, reviving, retro classic games. There's all the remasters and everything. You've got, indie developers are trying to emulate the style of older games. Do you think that sort of also played a bit of a part in sort of keeping Meridian 59 going?
I don't know. I mean, the art style of Meridian 59 it's too new to be retro cool pixel, and it's too old to be considered good 3D. It's kind of, it was, there was no good looking games made in the early 90s. Like, they're either the latest 2D games that at the time no one wanted to play anymore, or the first 3D games, which I mean, like all of the monsters and everything, they're sprites. You know, the 3D part is the levels, but you know, mobs were not made out of polygons. So I don't think that's a style. That style hasn't yet come back. We might need another 10 or 20 years for that one.
How do you see the future of Meridian 59? Do you see another 10 or 20 years?
I think so, and I think it's because of the open sourcing. I mean, there's people, there's enough people playing it who started in the 2000s, let's say, that they won't all be dead anytime soon. So I think it's going to stick around for quite a while now.
Yeah, and we've invested enough. Like we've tried to, we ported the server from Windows to Linux, for example, which is something that we never would have.
Not something I thought was ever going to happen.
Yeah, but we did it and it actually worked. So now it's very cheap to run, right? Because you can very easily. I mean, it doesn't have a lot of load. You can run it on a single AWS instance for very cheap. So
I ran it on something that was worse than a Raspberry Pi. You can run the server on something that costs less than a Raspberry Pi. Right? When we were spending thousands of dollars on these expensive machines in an expensive server room in 1996, and now I mean I had one this like chip computer is about that big. And it ran, I compiled and ran the server on it. So yeah, so why would it go away? It's free and it's fun.
Yeah, so I think like for technical reasons, except for one bug that we made a mistake in 1994 that we're still paying for. There's a single bug where like every 12 years or something, like the clocks all reset inside the game and we need to do some surgery. So that's a mistake that we will regret for the rest of our lives. But other than that, yeah, it kind of runs itself. And so really you just need the players to show up. And we don't have ridiculous expectations. If anyone shows up, we'll keep the game running. Like, I'll keep it running as long as I can get out of bed. So I think there's now enough. There's kind of critical mass on the user-run servers where they have a lot more users than our version does, which is totally fine. In fact, that's the whole idea, right? We don't have the time to continue to develop it. We've got families and other things going on. But if other people are interested, they should and have done better. That's amazing.
Have you spent much time looking at some of those other servers?
I haven't played on them. I've seen some of the.
Remember, we got the tour of that one 2 months ago.
Yeah, I mean that's when we were really playing. We were kind of like honored guests and got to look at it. But we've seen some of the technology, the tech changes they've made, and they're very deep. Like they're pretty good. Like the game has a scripting language inside of it, which was probably the best decision we made because we knew that we had two programmers, us and people who were going to build the game were not going to be C programmers. So C was the only language games were written in at the time. So we have our own scripting language, and I wrote a compiler for the scripting language. And I thought nobody would ever touch it because like that's, writing compilers is a rather advanced skill, but there are people who've gone way beyond in improving the compiler and the server and fixing like all things that we thought, boy, we could fix this one day if we really wanted to, but it would be, months of work. And they've done a lot of those things. So yeah, I think those people have invested enough time into it. It's going to last a long time.
This is sort of a bit of a difficult relationship between, I guess, MMO studios and that private server sort of community. It seems like you guys have been really supportive of open sourcing and really, I guess, giving the game to the people. Whereas I know that, for example, Ultima Online sort of always had there was always the difficulty of should you be paying or should you be playing on this free server that's doing different things? World of Warcraft had its own issues. EverQuest had its own issues. Do you think that some of the MMO studios would benefit from stepping back? Do you think that private servers really have that much of a negative impact on a core game?
Yeah, I mean, corporations are conservative by nature. I mean, the Mickey Mouse is still in copyright. Like, why? Right? Like, are they really going to make that much money off of Ultima Online or the EverQuest name? I mean, if you're running a corporation, like, there's zero risk to just saying no all the time. Yeah. Right? Like, no, like, we might want to do something with it one day. So I kind of understand that position. But on the other hand, if you're kind of looking to globally maximize, there's definitely a brand issue there too. If you really think that there's not much of a chance of EverQuest 7 coming out, what's the harm? I think we've shown that you can, on a small scale at least, get a lot of goodwill from letting, even going beyond just letting people do things, but actually giving them more stuff, right? Like, yes, we'll open source it. Microsoft did that with one of their MMOs that kind of didn't work out. And I feel like it really reflected well on them. There's a space MMO they had. I can't remember the name.
Anarchy Online?
No, it was after that. Anyway, yeah, I think there can be a little bit of, I don't know, myopia. Like, I think maybe not seeing the bigger picture of, like, it does help to keep your users happy. I mean, there's a trade-off, because you don't want to do with the latest and greatest games that are making millions and millions of dollars. But for stuff that's old, I don't know, maybe we can be an example there that there's still a community that, that maybe you can use for other things. They're going to be your most loyal customers.
But I would say that our goals for Meridian 59, both at the beginning and now, are pretty different from any company making a game. Our goal at the beginning was to make the game and have people play it. The goal wasn't to make a company out of it. The goal wasn't to make money out of it. We wanted to have happy users playing our game. And so, and now, frankly, we want happy users playing the game and not bothering us because we don't have time to fix stuff. But it's our goal, even when we had our own company, and even as we were part of 3DO, our goal was to have happy users playing the game. And I mean, that's something that's kind of stuck with me my whole career. I mean, with Xfire, a company I made, like, my whole goal was build this platform where we have happy users. And with Athenascope, I'm focused on let's build a platform where there's a lot of happy users. And if you start there, and from there, if you can build a business on top of that, great. But more important is, are you building something that's providing value to people, and they're getting enjoyment or value out of it, and you've contributed to something. And most games, in certain people's minds, maybe they're built that way, but if a company is funding it from the beginning, the company's goals is pretty straightforward, to make money. So they just have different goals for what they want out of their users. They just want, okay, if we can get $4 more by making 8,000 people unhappy, then fine, that's an easy decision. But for us, it's essentially the exact opposite. It's like, well, like, we didn't have to open source it. Maybe you could have run it from, I don't know, we weren't interested in it. We want to just get back, and we want users happy and enjoying it. So even if, like, we've had a couple people want to license the trademark or the name first, or, like, who knows how much of it was credible or not, but, like, we're not trying to make a few extra bucks if it involves having a lot fewer people playing the current game. Like, that's, it's just a different goal.
So what are you both doing today, other than keeping Meridian 59 going? And do you still find that Meridian 59 is a big part of your life? Do you are people sort of still asking you about it?
Yeah, I guess I'll go first. After Meridian, I went to LucasArts, because I saw how games, in my opinion, I felt, okay, here's how games should not be made. I'm going to go to a company that makes games that have made successful games. I want to learn how to make games the right way. So I did that, and then I went to Google for quite a while, and I did a few startups, and now I'm kind of semi-retired. But I mean, I feel like there were kind of really two important things that I've done, so, like, work-wise, that I've done so far, and they're both things where I was ahead of my time. Meridian was one, and there was something I did at Google called Google Now, which I felt was also really far ahead of its time. And they both kind of met similar fates, or had similar outcomes, which was they were kind of, I guess, critically praised. Users loved them. They were very influential, and a lot of products that came after them, like, directly copied / stole a lot of their features. And they both were commercial flops. And I think that's that's a blessing and a curse to be ahead of your time, because the people who come second or third learn from your mistakes. They're very well funded, because they're copying. They're not innovating. They're copying stuff, and there's nothing against that. I mean, they make billions of dollars that way. So I don't know. I feel like I've been kind of blessed and cursed in that way too. Like, my good ideas have come too early, and if they were 5 years later, I don't know. Like, sure, they would have made more money, but the part that I loved, like I said, my most favorite part of Meridian was the first day that it launched. And so for me, like doing the version 1 of things and working the 80 hours, maybe not anymore, but back in those days, that was what I lived for, and that's what I really enjoyed. So yeah, I know, kind of straight from the question, but yeah, I wouldn't kind of give up I wouldn't make that trade-off the other way for myself. I would rather have something that's ahead of its time and was very influential and super fun to work on and made a lot of people happy than something that was just, turn the crank, product comes out, makes $1 billion. I think that's easy to say when you don't have the $1 billion, but really, I feel like I'm much happier that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would say Meridian 59. I don't think I've been contacted about it specifically very often recently. I get, because I made Xfire, which was a lot more commercially successful, I guess. I hear about it from Xfire people a lot more often, or sometimes people from Yahoo Games, because I've stuck around in the game space for a lot of years. So I've done a bunch of things that I used to be known for making the Windows port of MAME for a long time, which is, the arcade game emulator. But now, kids these days don't really care about emulators anymore. There's just so many emulators and they all do everything perfectly that no one remembers back when they were first made. But Meridian 59, kicked it all off. So that was, and it was, the one big game that I've been a part of. I've made a lot of small games, but nothing as big as Meridian 59 for sure.
If you were going to, I don't know, go back and talk to your, say something to your young selves back when you were just starting out with Meridian 59, if you give yourself or maybe a young developer today a good piece of advice to think of before starting out, what would you say to them?
I'd say learn how to work in a team, and not just the team of, the 2 or 3 people that the best in the world already, but when you hire other people or you start working with other people or you get acquired by somebody else, the skills of being able to work in larger teams is really what controls if you're able to scale up your abilities to create things much, much larger than you ever could possibly do on your own. I think that's something that we were not very good at that point.
Yeah, I would say something very similar. Like, we were young hotshot programmers. Sure, we were years ahead of other people. We thought we were the greatest, but ultimately we didn't succeed, not because of anything technical. Like, we didn't make any technical mistake, very few, but we made a lot of mistakes about when we were acquired and how we built our team and selling, like not literally selling, but like, projecting our image and trying to get people to understand that this is what MMOs are. And like, 3DO was actually ahead of their time in another way, where they had an internal project where they were going to do a lot of internet development. In 1996, they had a huge project plan to do a whole lot of different internet games, which no one was planning to do at this scale. And I think that was actually pretty visionary, but they got a lot of stuff wrong. And if we really were visionaries, we would have launched our game and then convinced the company that what you have the right idea, but you're doing it the wrong way. Let me show you how to do it the right way. But that's not what we did. We just came in and said, like, what we're doing is good and what you're doing is bad. And so if I don't think I would have listened, but if I could tell myself then what I know now, which is, don't be such a jerk. Try to you have, programming is not your only job. That's one of your jobs, but you have another big job, which is to teach the other people around you, about what you're doing, so that they understand and they internalize it, and so they can do it themselves, right? So you can make the other people around you better. Like Chris said, like that would have made a big difference.
Yeah, it's just crazy to think that they actually had, I think there was either 2 or 3 game teams working on internet-based games in 1996 at 3DO, which is, both genius and idiocy, because it would have been genius if they'd worked out, but they were very hamstrung and they were all failures.
Well, we knew what was wrong. In fact, like we looked at those games and we said, boy, this isn't going to work for XYZ reason. But going,
we weren't able to change it, though.
We weren't able to change it. And that's a skill we were missing. And that is a very, very important skill. And I think as we've gotten older, we've gotten a little better at that. And so any success that I feel like I've had has been less from getting to be a better programmer, which has mattered 5%. And the 95% has been like, oh, I actually learned how to manage people eventually. Like when I grew up enough to be able to empathize with people and understand what they needed. So that, you know, if you're a top graduate or you think you're a hotshot programmer or something, that's certainly a very useful skill. But it's a small part of what you need to succeed, like Chris is saying, in a big team.
Well, Chris and Andrew, thank you very much for talking about Meridian 59 and your experiences of the industry. And that valuable advice at the end as well. But yeah, I wish you all the best, and I hope Meridian 59 is going for another 20 or 30 years, as you say, because it is well and truly a piece of video gaming history. But yeah, thank you very much for having a chat to me.
Thanks,
Gavin. It was a pleasure.